In this video, we're going to look at estimating differences. So we will estimate differences between numbers using rounding again. So some vocabulary today that we need to remember is estimate means to find an approximate number, not an exact number. So we'll be figuring out about what the difference is. And difference is going to be another vocabulary word today that we need to know. That means when you subtract the numbers, you are finding the difference. That's what would be the answer when we are subtracting. So let's take a look at an example when we might want to use this of estimating when we're finding differences. So let's say I have a friend, Sarah, and she collected 356 aluminum cans to recycle. Pierre collected 117 cans. I want to know about how many more cans did Sarah collect than Pierre. So again, I'm going to use my rounding as a helpful tool here. So I can do, the important thing is about. I'm not going to get an exact answer. And if I want to know about how many, I'm not going to just completely guess. I'm going to use rounding to get a pretty close amount to see what it might be. So Sarah collected 356 and Pierre collected 117. So I'm going to write down those numbers, 356 and 117. To find this, I would subtract 117 from 356. That's kind of tricky for me, and I only want to know just about how many more. I don't need to know the exact one. So I'm going to round first, and then I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to round the numbers, and I can round either to the tens or the hundreds, depending on how accurate I want to be. For right now, I'm going to just round to the hundreds. So looking at the hundreds to round, I'm going to go to my next place value over, which is going to be the tens place, and I see a 5. So remember, 5 and up, I round up. 4 and lower, then I'm going to round down. So 356 rounds up to the nearest 100 to 400. So we know that Sarah collected about 400. Then Pierre collected 117. So if I'm going to round to the nearest 100 here, I'm going to look at my hundreds place, then move over to the tens. That's a 1, so I would need to round down. So to the nearest 100, it would be 100. Now, if I'm finding out about how many, then I would be subtracting. So 400 minus 100 is going to be 300. So Sarah collected about 300 more cans than Pierre. If I wanted to get even more accurate, I could round to the tens place. So if I think about this, and I can keep those numbers, if I want a little bit more accurate, I can go farther down along the place value. And I might do instead to the tens place. So in this case, if I run it to the tens place instead, 356 then becomes 360 because the 6 makes me round the tens place up. Then if I'm rounding to the tens place here of 117, the 7 makes me round up for when I am subtracting, or for when I am rounding to the tens. So it would be 120. And I could subtract that too. So 360 minus 120, I would have 240. So that gets me a little bit closer. If it doesn't super matter, like in this case, if it's just cans, then I can round to the hundreds place. So that's kind of up to what our purpose of rounding is, and if we want to get more accurate or not. So as we're working today, we need to pay attention to where it's asking us to round to. Sometimes it'll ask us to the 100, sometimes it'll ask us to the 10. So today we have, in this first example that we're going to do together, round to the nearest 100. So looking at these numbers right here, we have 321. Thinking to the nearest 100, what number would you round that to? The 2 in the tens place indicates that I would round it down to 300. Then I have 112. What number would you round it to? To the nearest hundreds. If I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds, I'm looking at the tens place. That's a 1, meaning I'd round it down. So I'd round to 100. 300 minus 100 is going to be 200. So the difference is going to be about 200. Let's take a look at another one. This time, it's going to ask us to round to the nearest 10. So I'm going to take 579 and 214. My first number is 579. Think to yourself what you would round that to the nearest 10. If I'm looking at the nearest 10, I have to pay attention to the ones place. The ones place in this one is a 9, so what would I round? Do I do up or down? Right, in this case, I'm going to round up. So 570 becomes 580. My next number that I'm subtracting is 214. So again, think about if I'm rounding to the nearest 10, what would that become when I'm rounding? I'll look at the ones to round to the nearest tens. 4 means I'm rounding down. So this number, 214, rounds down to 210. Now I can subtract those numbers to see my estimated difference. 580 minus 210. If I'm subtracting, then I know that that should be 370. I know this because if I break them apart into my tens and my hundreds, 80 minus 10 is 70, and 500 minus 200 is 300. So it'll be about 370. Let's take another example. All right, this time, let's take a look. We're going to the nearest 100 to estimate. So I want you to pause the video, try this one on your own, and then press play when you're ready to do it with me or check your work. Now that you've had a chance to do it on your own, let's see how I would do it. We have 255, and if I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I have to look at my tens place. 5 in the tens place means I'm rounding up, so I would round up to 300. Looking at my next number, again rounding to the nearest 100. Looking at my tens place, I have an 8, which means I'm rounding up, so 189 then becomes 200. When I'm subtracting, this makes it nice and easy for me. 300 minus 200 is going to be 100. So I know when I'm subtracting 255 minus 189, it's going to be about 100. Let's do one more practice on your own, pausing the video to see what it might be, and then press play when you're ready to check your work. Okay, looking at this one, we rounded to the nearest 100. So taking the nearest 100 and looking at the tens, 493 now becomes 500 because the 9 is in the tens place, which means I'm rounding up. Then I have 126, so looking at the hundreds and the tens. A 2 in the tens place for 126 means I am rounding down, so that would round down to 100. 500 minus 100 equals 400. Hopefully that's becoming easier for you. The more practice you get with rounding, the better we'll get. And again, this can be helpful just to see about what your difference might be.